The corrupt nature of power. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the conversation. I'm David Schuster. There is a terrific, relatively new book out there about what power is, who gets it, and what happens when they have it. The author is Brian Klaas. He's a professor of global politics at the University of College in London. The name of his book is Corruptible: Who Gets Power and How It Changes Us. And Brian, first of all, what prompted you to write this book?
Yeah, so I started my career studying dictators and despots, and I went around the world interviewing some really awful people in a variety of different countries. And one of the things that happened was when I came back and I told people about this and these sort of depraved individuals, what people would say to me is, "Oh, I recognize those traits in my mid-level manager," or "That's the same kind of person who runs my homeowners association." So what I decided to do was to try to figure out whether that's true, whether that the traits that characterize awful people in politics, dictators, etc., are also simultaneously showing up in our lives, in the sort of more normal aspects of power, and trying to really understand why certain people gravitate towards power, why certain people are better at getting power, what power does to their brain when they get there, and also why we are drawn to all the wrong kinds of people to be in charge of us. And so the book is really looking at power, corruption, and why we end up with such awful leaders in our lives.
And some of those awful leaders, I would say a lot of those awful leaders, and this is backed up by a lot of what you say in the book, are psychopaths. What is it about power that attracts psychopaths and makes them even worse?
So there's this interesting cocktail in psychology known as the Dark Triad, and it refers to three parts, as you might expect: Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy, being a psychopath. And what the research is very clear on this is that psychopaths and people with the Dark Triad in general are drawn to power like moths to a flame. They really covet power, they want it, they're obsessed by it. But they're also very effective at getting it. And one of the reasons for that is because functional psychopaths, by the way, dysfunctional psychopaths end up in prison. Functional psychopaths can dial down their traits that are really, really catastrophic for their sort of behavior in certain contexts. So during a job interview, during an election, they can pass themselves off as better than they actually are. And so what you see is that during these short periods where you have to present yourself as sort of a normal, empathetic individual, people with the Dark Triad who have manageable levels of it are very, very good at wiggling their way into power, but they're catastrophically bad at wielding power. So one of the things I argue in the book is that we only focus on half the coin, the people who are actually in power. So our headlines look at, why are people in politics or business behaving badly? We don't spend enough time thinking about who never tried to get into politics or business leadership in the first place. And I think that's a mistake, because one of the things that I argue in the book is that the systems that you create around these fields of power and hierarchy determine who tries to self-select into them. And right now we've engineered a society in which most normal, decent people are repulsed by positions of power. So we've rolled out a red carpet to those of the Dark Triad. We've created systems that are really, really attractive to them. And then we help them get there because we are sometimes drawn to really awful leaders as a result of a variety of factors that means that we make irrational decisions about who we choose to put in charge.
And the people in charge, of course, not just in politics, but in terms of our day-to-day law enforcement, it seems like police have been attracting a lot of people who seem to be on power trips or have a chip on their shoulder. And you say that the issue of police violence, that at least our society up to this point hasn't really focused on the right issues. What do you mean?
Well, I think everything in the police reform debate that I've read in US politics is about what the police do, which is understandable. But I think we need to think much more carefully about who the police are. So what I started to look at in my research was, how do people recruit police officers around the world, and how does the United States differ from the rest of the world? So in this little town of Doraville, Georgia, which is about 20 minutes outside of Atlanta, 10,000 people, I found this video, recruitment video, that was on the main page of the website a couple of years ago. And it showed these cops who were in military fatigues and camouflage fatigues, driving around in literally a tank with death metal music and with the Punisher logo flashed on screen, which is a vigilante sort of anti-hero who basically tortures criminals. And then I compared that to what happens in New Zealand, where they've made a real careful assessment of what kind of people they want to have in the uniform. And the New Zealand police recruitment strategy is called, "Do you care enough to be a cop?" I mean, it's the opposite of the Punisher logo, right? And what they do in their recruitment videos, they're very lighthearted, very amusing. They depict police officers that are from a diverse array of backgrounds, lots of women, lots of ethnic minorities that are underrepresented in the police. And the video depicts them, rather than driving around in a tank, helping people cross the street and chasing this unseen criminal that turns out to be a border collie who's stolen a woman's purse. And then it flashes the "Do you care enough to be a cop" logo on the screen. And what struck me in the interviews that I conducted with people in the police in New Zealand in particular affirmed this, is that they got different people applying for the job when they portrayed the job differently. So when you think of being a cop as driving around in a tank and occupying a small town in America, the people who want to do that will apply. The people who want to get off on the power of a badge and a gun, they're gonna gravitate towards it. And of course, in the US, the rates of domestic abuse within people in uniform are much higher than the average population. So we have a serious problem. And I think rather than just trying to constrain police officers with body cameras, the easier thing to get better behavior is to actually get better police officers. And that requires much more sophisticated and thoughtful recruitment strategies than we currently use in the United States.
Does it also require changing the police culture in the United States? And that it seems like police officers, even the good ones, even the ones who you might say, yeah, they could help you find that old lady's bag or whatever it is, that they are trained to take control in any situation, to dominate a situation as opposed to de-escalate. And that seems to get to the other part of your book, and that is, it seems like positions of power, opportunities of power can take decent, fair-minded people and change them for the worse.
Absolutely. So in the police in particular, I think there is a problem with cultures of violence and abuse that tend to self-replicate. Because if you have a partner, for example, who you collude with or embezzle with, that's going to be something that continues into the next generation of police officers. Now, I think one of the things that would be really helpful in this situation is to think about oversight and the ways that we can try to hold police officers accountable. So I interviewed the former head of New York Police Department, the NYPD's internal affairs division. And what he designed was this thing called randomized stings, or integrity counter, say, a pile of cash on the table, a bunch of drugs, et cetera, and they would believe it's a real drug bust. What they wouldn't know is that there were actually cameras and microphones in this apartment watching them. And so what ended up happening in these situations was, some of the cops took the money, and when they did, they were arrested or fired. Now, what was really interesting about this is that they conducted 500 of these stings, but when they surveyed the police officers in the NYPD, 1,000 cops said that they had been subject to one of these stings, which means 11,500 had encountered real world situations that they thought was a setup. And so by exploiting the power of random oversight, you can end up creating, I think, a healthy level of fear in people in power that if they do abuse their position, they'll get caught. And I wish we would do that much more with those who have the most consequential positions in our society, including police officers.
You mentioned the incentives, that the people who don't seek out power tend to be the ones that actually would do better in positions of leadership and authority. Let's take the example for, you mentioned in the book, condo boards or a local, city council. How do you incentivize people who, they don't really want to do that kind of, how do you incentivize and change the system so that people who are not on a power trip are the ones who try to get into these positions?
Yeah, it's a great question, because when you have a position that is very thankless, like being a homeowners association leader, where you're going to have to police effectively your neighbors if they don't put their trash bins out on time, there's two types of people who want to do that. One are the public-minded people who think, well, somebody's got to do this, I might as well do it. The others are the people who enjoy control. And so you sort of enter this lottery in homeowners associations, which kind of person is going to dominate you. And I think that's a problem, because we have to make it more attractive. So some of it is you need to pay people. I mean, if you want to have better leadership, you need to make it attractive. The other aspect of this that I think is really important is understanding what we've done to local level leadership in the United States with all of the things that come with low level power. So for example, if you want to run to be a school board member or a local city councilor in America in 2022, you're going to have trepidation that that's going to come with death threats and harassment and crazy people showing up at your house. And that means that the people who are not power hungry will just say it's not really worth it, right? The people who are power hungry will say, I want to do this anyway because it's the payoff is the power. But we've basically engineered a society in which those best suited to wield power are least likely to seek it and have a hard time getting it. And I think that's the real problem here, where we have to think more creatively about engineering systems that attract and promote much better people into power from the local level on up.
Your book found that narcissists tend to make more money and that sometimes facial appearance determines how we pick our leaders. It sort of ties in with something that I've seen through the years in TV, and that someone who's the happy warrior, who smiles, who seems to enjoy themselves, is a more attractive person on TV than somebody who's always grimacing or a sourpuss. But in terms of leadership, what is it that you see in facial appearances?
Yeah, so in the introduction to the book, I talk about this study that's amazing. They basically showed these kids all these images, 2 images in each time, one face and another face, and they said, who do you think should be in charge of your imaginary ship in this computer sim, your boat? And they didn't give any other information to the kids. What the kids didn't know was that one of the faces they saw was the winner of a French election and the other face was the runner-up. And overwhelmingly, the kids picked the winner with no other information as the person who looked like a good leader. When they replicated the same experiment in adults, they found something similar. And so it gave new meaning to this idea of face value, taking someone at face value. And so I think one thing that we don't acknowledge enough is that there are non-rational things, cognitive biases we have that cause us to gravitate towards the wrong people for the wrong reasons. I think acknowledging that is crucial to ensuring that we get better people in charge and understanding that's not always about policy when people are casting their ballot in elections.
Brian, was there anything about putting this book together that surprised you in the final seconds we have left here?
Huge amounts of things surprised me. I think the facial study is one of them. I think another thing that people should check out is how the term strongman is no accident, and how we have a template in our brains that sometimes causes us during times of crisis to gravitate towards physically large, imposing men. And that answers the puzzle of why Vladimir Putin poses shirtless so often.
Remarkable stuff. Brian Klaas, again, he's a professor of global politics at the University College in London. The book is Corruptible: Who Gets Power and How It Changes Us. Brian, terrific work, and thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.